Live.
Great.
So, welcome everyone to the AMA session with Dr. Josh Starmer, and I will just do a really quick introduction for him, real quick. So, Dr. Starmer is the founder of the StatQuest YouTube channel, where he teaches statistics, machine learning, and other fields from computer science. He is also an instructor at Coursera teaching data science courses. So, his background is from the University of North California with a PhD in bioinformatics, biomathematics, and computational biology, including many publications in his career. So with that, let's give it away to the person you've all been here for. So, Josh Starmer, take it away. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat or in the Discord server. So I think we can get started. So we have some pre-submitted questions beforehand. So the first question is, what is the story behind how you got into what became passionate about data science?
Oh, that's a good question. Hopefully the answer isn't too long, but there's kind of like two sides to that coin. In that, I've when I was in graduate school, I took a class in statistics, and it didn't make any sense at all to me. But I was able to understand one concept, and that concept was variability in the data or variation in the data. Um, and that I don't, for some reason, uh, you know, life until then had been very simplistic. I hadn't really thought about variation in data. I thought like when you buy an apple, you get an apple. When you buy a banana, you get a banana. You don't get like one specific type of banana that's slightly different from all of the other bananas in the whole wide world. Or an apple that's slightly unique in its own way. I just thought they were all apples, they were all bananas, and that's the way I kind of thought about everything. I'd never really thought about the fact. I've never thought about the fact that when we measure things, when we collect things, that they are all different, and that concept of variation really grabbed me, gripped me as like I felt like the world went from black and white to color. All of a sudden, I felt like I understood the world around me a lot more. But other than that, I didn't understand a single thing in that statistics class. It was complete mystery to me. I had this book, and I would try to read the book, and couldn't figure out what was going on in there. And the lectures didn't make any sense. I somehow passed the class. I don't actually know how. Um, but regardless of the fact that I didn't understand anything, I still understood that there was this thing called variation, and so I wanted to learn more about that, obviously, um, statistics is all about that variation. It's about quantifying and making sense of that variation and what does it mean, and I kind of fell in love with trying to understand that. I spent a lot of time on my own trying to teach myself statistics since it didn't work well in the class. Um, and and when I came to my own realizations and I was able to teach myself statistics, I started teaching the people around me statistics, and it turned out that even people in the statistics PhD program, they started wanting me to teach them certain things like how do linear models really work and things like that. So I was really, I kind of hit something pretty early on that I was good at, um, and I enjoy communicating with other people. I don't. Not many people know that. I mean, I record a lot of silly songs, but I'm also a musician, and communicating has always been very important to me. It's especially clear communicating because I don't want anyone to feel left out. I don't want anyone to think, oh, like they're not part of the cool crowd because they don't understand what's going on. I want everyone to be part of the fun and everyone to be part of the story. And so that's been also one of my big motivations for sort of sharing my love for statistics and my love for variation in data with other people and trying to make it as clear as possible. As I want everyone to be a part of that fun.
Wow, that's a very inspiring story. Thank you for sharing. And the next question is, do you enjoy making StatQuest tutorials, videos on YouTube? probably someone who subscribed to your channel. So yeah.
I mean, I love it. It's a dream come true. It's the most fun thing I can think of to do with my time. It's fun, but it's also satisfying and rewarding. I love it. And one thing that I love is learning new things. It's almost like an adrenaline rush or something when I learn something new. And when I make, a lot of people think that I already know everything there is to know about statistics, or I already know everything there is to know about machine learning. But I really only know I only know what the next video is gonna be, and so I'm learning all the time, and so I love that process. Making the videos themselves is a lot like solving a puzzle. Like what's the trying to figure out the best way to display the data, display what's going on, how to visualize that. I go through a lot of drafts trying to figure out the optimal colors. Like colors and shapes and all that stuff. It's a lot of fun. I feel very fortunate that it's something that I get to do because I enjoy it so much.
Yeah, thank you for the answer. I also personally really enjoy your videos.
Oh,
And do you recommend any books for machine learning or data science? Or have you written any? Or do you plan so in the future?
I am writing one right now. I'm writing the StatQuest Illustrated Guide to Machine Learning. I've got about 70 pages done so far, and the plan for that is right now I'm doing a series of videos on Bayesian statistics. I just started it, and when that series is over, probably at the end of September is when I'll be done with that series of videos. I'm gonna From then on, I'm gonna dedicate full time to the book and try to finish it. My original goal is to have it done by the end of the year, uh, and I'm gonna do everything I can to get it done by the end of the year. But the goal is just to get it done. And so hopefully by 2022, early to mid 2022, I'll have the StatQuest available. Um, Other than that, I'm a big fan of the introduction to statistical learning in R. That's a You can get that. You can Google that, and there's a PDF that you can download for free. Maybe not the latest edition of that book, but the earlier editions are great. I've learned a lot from that book, and a lot of my videos follow that book. So if you're reading that book and you're like, "Oh, this doesn't make any sense to me," you can there's usually a corresponding StatQuest video for each section.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And and I don't know if this is a bit personal, but so if people watch your video, we know that you have a passion for both music and data science, which is very cool. So which one do you think you're more passionate about over the other? So if you were to start your career, would you
Yeah.
pick another one?
Well, a lot of people don't know that I started out trying to be a professional musician. I went to school. I grew up playing the cello, which is it's like a big if you're not familiar with the cello, it's like a big violin that you play sitting down. Um, I grew up playing the cello, and I wanted to be a professional cello player. So music is a real important part of my life. But when I went to school for just music, I missed I miss doing I miss sort of, using my brain very much. I mean, music is very passionate and all that stuff, but it's not very analytical. I have a very analytical side of my brain, and I missed that. Um, and so then I actually switched out of that program, and I switched into another program that allowed me to do music and computer science at the same time. And when I was doing both, I was like, "Oh, I'm happy." And I remember at one point, later on, before I was about to graduate, I spent about a year just doing computing and not doing music, and I was miserable. And then I did another year of just music without computing, and I was miserable. And I found that I'm only happy when I can do both. And it's obviously, you know, the analytical stuff in StatQuest, that's my primary focus in life, because I feel like that makes the biggest difference in the world. Um, like I love music, and I love playing it. It's super fun, and I like writing songs. Um, but my music doesn't have the same impact on the world that my videos have. And so if I had to choose one, I would choose StatQuest. But I have found it's hard. It's hard, if not impossible, to actually choose one. And so I always have music there, and that's why there's always a silly song at the beginning of each video. Music is just a part of everything I do.
Oh, wow, that's amazing, and I really appreciate that StatQuest tutorials. It definitely helped a lot of students pursuing this degree. So on that path, we have a question from a hacker of ours. So he said, I am not very good at math, but I'm very enthusiastic about machine learning. Should I start my career in machine learning, or should I master some math skills first?
That's a great question. I'll be honest with you. I'm terrible at math. Um, so you can actually do it all. You don't have to be good at math. It's one of the big sort of misnomers or sort of misconceptions about these things is that it's assumed that you have to be a math genius to do it all. And one of the reasons for that is how these topics are often taught. They're taught by math geniuses, and math geniuses typically are only know how to explain things to other math geniuses, leaving us the rest of everybody else out, in the cold. But it's actually, math is important, and you need to understand the concepts of it. But it's not critical to being successful in, believe it or not, statistics or machine learning. So sort of pick whatever is your interest and go for it. The catch is there's the material, even though it's in theory possible to learn the material without being a great mathematician. um it's still most of the resources out there are going to still assume that you are a great mathematician, and that makes it difficult. One of the goals with StatQuest is to sort of break it down and um, to help people realize that it's not as math heavy as people assume it is. So I don't know. You may, practical. In theory, you don't need to know math, but in practice, it might be easier to do machine learning and approach it from an algorithmic perspective. So if you can understand algorithms, you can understand almost all of machine learning. Um, uh, but I don't know. I don't know what the best option is, in practical settings. But it is possible to do it without being a math genius, because I'm an example of someone who's not that good at math.
Well, that makes me much more confident if I want to pursue a career with this path. So, another question is, do you think data science is essential in today's world? Or before the digital age, is data science relevant in society? I think,
I definitely think it's critical right now, not just relevant, but critical. Uh, you know, 20 years ago, well, even 20 years ago, we were already headed on this path towards being able to generate more data than we know what to do with. But I mean, it's, I mean, I feel like data science is sort of uh, the 21st century version of the microscope. It used to be, that you could take anything you wanted. You could prick your finger, and you could get a little blood out of your finger, and you could put that on a glass slide, and you could put it under a microscope, and you could look at it, and you'd see some red blood cells, you might see some white blood cells, you'd see all these different cells floating around. And back in the day, that was enough. You could say, wow, there's all, like, I thought it was just this red liquid, but it turns out it's made out of all these interesting things. um and back in the day, a microscope did wonders, right? It kind of helped. It was part of the scientific revolution. It changed the world. Right now, when we prick our finger and we get a little bit of blood, we don't just put it under a microscope. We put it into a high throughput sequencer, and instead of being able to identify individual cells, we can identify the action of individual genes. And every person has 20,000 genes, and we can sequence every single cell in that little pool of blood. And there might be, in a little tiny pool of blood, there might be 1 million cells or something like that. um, and now we just generate crazy amounts of data. Well, how do we make sense of that stuff? Like we did with a microscope, we could say, hey, there's a red blood cell. Well, with data science and sort of and techniques that are developed for looking at large amounts of data, we can make a lot of sense. We could look at that prick of blood and go, oh, that's Josh Starmer, and he's going to be resilient to certain types of diseases. He may be prone to getting others, and we can learn a lot about him, and we can maybe learn how to, if I get sick, they could learn how to treat me better that way. And I just think, and this prick of blood thing is just one example of a source of a lot of data that we have. Pretty much every industry, not just biomedical industry, um, but finance, e-commerce, you name it, is generating tons of data. And really, the only way to make sense of it is through sort of data science techniques. And so I don't think it's just important or necessary. I think it's actually critical uh, right now.
Oh, that's so cool because I just thought data science just sorting a column in Excel or something. But yeah, that's very cool. And another question from a fan is that I really enjoy watching your videos and it's so cool. Well, what's the process of making your videos on
Ah,
StatQuest?
yeah. So what's the process? I mean, I pick a topic that I want to learn, and I research it like crazy. I don't a lot of people think I watch YouTube videos. I actually don't watch YouTube videos because I'm afraid if I watch YouTube videos, I'll try to copy them, and I don't want to copy what other people are doing. The reason why people come to my channel, StatQuest with Josh Starmer, the reason why people come to that to begin with is I think they're hoping that I'll explain it in a different way from what other people do. So that's one thing I don't do is I don't watch YouTube videos, but I read everything I can. I'll read blog posts, I read Stack Exchange, I read the original manuscripts for someone was like when I did my videos on AdaBoost, I read all the original manuscripts that were published early on, that describe the original algorithm. I'll go through the original manuscripts. I'll go through code implementations. I go through a lot of like scikit-learn implementations and kind of look at their code to see if I can understand them, what's going on. And so I just do a lot of research. And I'll be honest, um, when I read those blog posts and I read those manuscripts and I look at that code, uh, it oftentimes doesn't make any sense at all to me, and it's really scary. It's actually, I'm kind of getting sweaty palms just thinking about it. It's very scary at first, um, because uh, because I don't understand it, and I'll doubt my ability to actually understand it. I'll look at all this stuff and I'll go, they're using all these Greek symbols that I'm not familiar with, and uh, uh, I can't make sense of what they mean. It doesn't make any, like what's going on here. What do they mean? I don't know. It usually doesn't make any sense at all. And I just keep reading and reading and reading and reading and reading. And because even though I'm scared, I won't be able to understand. I'm I'm kind of determined to do it anyways, just in case I might stumble over something. And usually I do. I'll usually come up with something, some little nugget, and I'll go, well, nothing else made sense. And I spent like 5 days or, maybe even 2 weeks or something trying to read everything, and none of it made sense. But I just found this one little thing, and it doesn't explain everything, but it explains a little piece. And now I understand maybe what out of those 20 Greek symbols, maybe I understand what this one represents. And then once I have that little bit of knowledge, I'll go back to the top. all those articles and blog posts and all those things that I read before, I will read them again, now knowing what that one thing means. And when I know that one thing what it means, usually by the time I get through everything the second time, maybe I know two things mean. And I just keep doing that until I understand, I don't know, maybe 30% of what's going on. And then what I'll do, so and that's just me trying to understand conceptually what the algorithm is or the process. And then once I feel like I've got about 30% of the understanding, I'll try to code it myself. Uh, and by code it myself, I don't always mean implement it. Like, say, like I'm trying to learn about XGBoost. I'll try to come up with a real simple data set, and I'll download XGBoost, and I'll just plug my really simple data set into XGBoost, sort of trying to predict what XGBoost is going to do. And then I'll run it, and I'll see that my prediction was 100% wrong, and I got it. It was it was a terrible prediction. And so then what I try to do is figure out why. Like, why was I guessing one thing, and why did something else happen? And I try to figure out what the difference is. And that usually means going back and reading everything again. Um and I just keep doing this cycle of plugging in my basic reading everything, plugging in my basic data set into the equation, seeing what happens, realizing it's not what I expect, and then just doing it again and again until finally, and this can take a long time, I get it. And that's like the best day ever, right? I finally understand what's going on, and it's like, whoa, it's really cool. And that's the process of researching a video. The next step is to draw pictures and try to make it relatable and understandable in a way that makes sense to me, because I've read all those papers, and I know that they didn't make sense to me because they didn't. And so I'm like, well, how would I explain this? How does this make sense to me? And I'll try to and I'll what I'll do is I'll create what I try to do is create a visual interpretation of what's going on. And it's funny because sometimes my explanations are so clear and so visual that people don't actually trust them. But my visualizations are not actually dumbed down versions of the algorithm. They are true to the algorithm. I did a series on neural networks, and people actually criticized my video. People criticize the video because they're like, "This is too simple. It can't be the real neural networks algorithm." No, it's the real thing. It's just I'm explaining it in a much simpler way. But the algorithm itself is not dumbed down. It's just now you understand it, and you doubted that you could understand it. And now that you understand it, you're like, well, there's got to be some trick. Um, but that's the process of research is it can take forever. I mean, some like my PCA video, I probably researched that for a solid year. I mean, I had a full-time job, so it wasn't like all day, every day I was researching PCA, but I plugged away at that concept of how does singular value decomposition work with respect to principal component analysis. I probably plugged away at that for a year before I even started to make the video.
Yeah, well, that's amazing, and I completely agree with you. Is that teaching someone else is actually the best way to learn, and it doesn't really mean to teach someone means you master that skill, because obviously most of the time you're learning at the same time as well. And here comes a little bit of a technical question. So, what's the difference between a statistical model and a machine learning model? Because, like, if you look at their definition, it really
Mhm.
refers to the same thing. So, are there any major differences between the two?
I think the biggest difference is how they're used. Um, Statistical models are typically used to focus in on the data that you have collected, and you're. I mean, the idea of the statistical model is to then say, oh, and it generalizes to a wider variety of things. But but the focus of a statistical model. So let me give you an example. Like when I think of statistics, I typically think of like, when I worked in a research lab, we did statistics because what we were trying to do is um, see if we'd collect a lot of data, and we were trying to see if we could find a signal in that data. Yeah, was there something important going on in that data? We'd measure all these genes, and we'd say, are there any important changes in, like, in a cancer tissue versus a healthy tissue? Can we identify sort of a signal in that cancer tissue that does not exist in the normal tissue? And we're looking for that signal. What we're not trying to do is we're not trying to, like, create a model where you give me a cell, and I then try to classify it as cancer versus healthy. That's what machine learning does. Machine learning tries to develop a model so that it can make future classifications. Whereas I think of statistics as just like hunting down that signal and trying to identify that signal, but not necessarily using it for making future classifications. So it's more, the difference is subtle. It's really just a use case, how they're used. And machine learning can be used in a research setting easily, as a way to sort of like generate new hypotheses. Uh, but I tend to think of statistics as more just looking for that signal.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope the answer helps this hacker. And we have another question here is that can you share a project or idea with which you went through all of that you just told? I think this question here is just ask is there any project that we can use for data science with data science?
Can you share a project or idea with which you went through all you so like the reading process? I mean, I mean that's what I did. That's what I do for all of my videos. And maybe you're asking about a new topic. Are you asking about something I haven't covered in a video? I mean, you can pretty much apply it to anything in machine learning. I mean, any like like imputation. I mean, that's a topic people ask me about, but I haven't covered yet. How do you impute values? That's something I would use that process of, read everything there is about how to impute data and try to make sense of it. And then there's a couple of standard algorithms. So I'd create a simple data set with some missing data, and I'd plug it into those standard imputation algorithms, and I'd see if they got they imputed the values that I was expecting. So that's what I would do. I don't know if I answered that question or.
Yeah, thank you, and hopefully that helps. And we have another question from another hacker is that I'm relatively new to this field, and what's the difference between big data and data science? Are they the same thing?
I mean,
They
they're very. I mean, I don't know. I mean, maybe they're the same thing, maybe they're not. A lot of these terms, at least right now, are relatively fluid, and sort of depending on who you talk to, someone might be adamant that they're different, and all other people may not care so much. Uh, I feel like there's a lot of terminology in these fields, and the important thing isn't necessarily the terminology; it's the concepts. Um, I mean, I don't know. Data science can obviously be applied to small data sets. It's not always big data. It's more of I think of data science as sort of a general philosophy towards data analysis, where you've got some statistics, you've got some machine learning skills. You might have some database skills, so you know how to access data, you know how to manipulate data, you know how to clean up data, you know how to run that data through algorithms to generate graphs and charts, or maybe a classification machine or something like that. I tend to think of that as sort of like the data scientist, as sort of like a little bit of a jack of all trades. And most importantly, the data scientist has curiosity, and the data science isn't just some robot that like plugs in data and gets a response and goes, okay, here it is. The data science is someone who's also kind of curious as to what's going on in the data. Um, Whereas big data, I think, is just big data. It's just a big, huge pile of data. And there are lots of techniques that are designed for dealing with big, huge piles of data. But those techniques can also work on smaller data sets. So it's like I feel like the terminology is relatively fluid, and I wouldn't be, you know, I wouldn't get too bent out of shape over trying to use one term over the other. It's sort of like whatever word communicates the best to the audience you're talking to is the one to use rather than try to find some absolute uh, definition for these terms.
Yeah, there are many terminologies in this field. So the next question is, what's the hardest concept you had to learn during your career, or the most challenging thing?
Yeah, what's the hardest one? Um, I don't know. I'll be honest, they're all really hard. And I'm every single time. I mean, the fact that every time I go through this thing of like, I'm not going to be able to solve this one. I always go through that phase of self doubt and like just thinking it's going to be impossible. Um, I mean, PCA was a hard one. XGBoost was pretty hard for me. Gradient boost was hard for me. AdaBoost was hard. General linear models, I spent a long time on that. And that was very hard for me. And it's one of those things that now that I've figured out how to explain it is actually pretty straightforward. But it wasn't always like that for me. It was really hard. It was super hard for me. I don't know. I can't pick a single one that's hard because they all seem hard and they all seem intimidating to me until I finally figure it out. And then all of a sudden it's like a soft, cuddly teddy bear and it's no big deal.
Yeah, wow, awesome. Thank you for the answer. And do you have any suggestions for a beginner data scientist or students pursuing data science right now as like their major?
Yeah.
Any recommendations or suggestions they should be aware of in this field?
Yeah. I have a lot of recommendations. I mean, the big one is uh, curiosity. Make sure you're curious. That's a real important trait or ability that a person in data science I think needs to have. So, I mean, I mean, just take a look at yourself in the mirror, and if you're to be honest, if you're just not very curious, you're just not interested in things. It may not be the field for you, and that might be a mean or hard thing to say, but trust me, if you can find something else to do, you'll be happier. Um, so curiosity is super important. I mean, if you're not very curiosity, but you want to become curious, I mean, then go right ahead. But if you're generally, you're just like, I'm fine with just being told how everything is in the world, and I don't really want to learn anything new. Then uh, you know that's not very good for data science. And you'd be better off doing something else. So curiosity is super important. Um, The other thing I think is really important is and it's all basic like curiosity, is to understand that um, data, although it looks like numbers and strings in a spreadsheet, um, data is always actually a lot more than just that. I mean, when we see data, we'll download a file, we'll open it up, and like, hey, it's just numbers in a spreadsheet, no big deal. Data, there's always a story behind. Uh, where that data was collected from, how it was collected, who collected it. There's all these things, result in subtle biases in the data, or if one person collected the data, it might be different from the way somebody else might collect the data. And even if it's like you're just monitoring clicks on a website, well, there's which clicks are you gonna what things are you gonna pay attention to? That's gonna shape what you can get out of that data, what you can do with it, and what that data is ultimately going to mean and represent. So sort of along the lines of curiosity, realize that data is never just numbers on the page. There's always a story behind it, and that story dictates what we can do and what we can't do with that data. And it also tells us what the limitations of that data are. Um, a lot of people talk about sort of, biases or prejudices that are in machine learning. A lot of that comes from sort of data collection, and how it's collected and who's collecting it, and and what is collected. And it's really important to understand how those factors can influence your results. It's not just data in, results out. It's data plus a lot of baggage, plus a lot of story, that we have to understand. And we can't just plug it in blindly into an algorithm and expect it to give us useful results. So those are the two things I recommend to any aspiring data scientist: is one, be curious, but two, be curious about the data and what it means. It's all I get. Well, I can keep going. It's also important to be curious about the algorithms you're using. It's really tempting to just use the algorithms like they're black boxes, and because once you, I mean, one thing that's awesome about scikit-learn and other sort of packages is they kind of give you a common interface to a bunch of different machine learning methods. And even if you don't understand how each machine learning method works, it still takes the same input and it still gives you the same sort of like output stuff to read. And so it's possible, it's very easy, with scikit-learn and other toolkits to swap out machine learning algorithms, without really knowing what those algorithms are doing. And it's, even though that's possible, I think it's a bad idea, because uh, eh, because uh, uh, because weird things can happen if you treat the algorithm like it's a black box. A lot of people, for example, a lot of people treat neural networks like it's a black box, and they're like, I don't actually need to know what it's doing. Partly because it's impossible. I mean, for the most part, it's usually very difficult to visualize what a neural network's doing. But if you use a very, very, very simple data set, which is what I do in my videos on neural networks, uh, it's possible to see that weird things happen. And if weird things happen with a simple data set, it's possible that weird things are going to happen with a complicated data set too. And it's important to know um, what those weird things are in order to understand the limitations of that method. What are the limitations of neural networks? I mean, because I can visualize it for a simple data set, I can say the limitations of a neural networks are it doesn't always extrapolate between data points as you as a human might extrapolate. It's going to do different extrapolations, because it has different incentives and different penalties for how it works. And it's important to know those limitations. It's very important to know those limitations. Um, and so that's the other thing I say, be curious about the algorithms. It's worth learning how those algorithms work. Do you have to code them? Do you have to? The answer is no. But you do need to understand the basic concepts of how it works. What are the principles upon which that algorithm operates? That's important to know. And the last thing, I think it's important to be curious about sort of um, what you're actually doing. Like we tend to just think of like, oh, we're just working with data and we're working with algorithms. We just combine the two. But there's actually a context for the work that we ourselves do. We can be working for a company that's doing awesome things, and that's a really exciting place to be. Or it could be working for a company that's, really just not trying to do awesome things. They're just trying to make a buck, and there's a certain value to just trying to make a buck. I mean, I don't want to blame people for that. But as data scientists, I mean, it's kind of it's a we have some freedom. There's enough demand for good data scientists that we have some freedom that we can choose what role we play in society as a data scientist. And I think it's important to consider that role, and what we're trying to do and what we're trying to accomplish. Are we putting our effort in a way that's going to make the world a better place or not? And I think that's an important question that we have to answer, and sort of what our goals are with data science. So, I mean, you could come to your own conclusions as to how you want to answer those things, but I'm saying at least think about it, and think about what your role is, not just in your company and with relationship to the data and the algorithms, but also within the scope of the whole world and the greater community in which you live.
Yeah, thank you for this amazing answer, and I hope it helps for all you data science students out there. And we got another question in the chat is how did you start programming? Which I assume, have you started statistics first, or have you done programming first?
So when I was a little kid, I started programming because I wanted to make my own video game. I was working on a this is really funny. I hadn't thought of this in forever. My web, my what is it? My YouTube channel is called StatQuest with Josh Starmer, right? StatQuest. Well, when I was 10 years old, I was trying to create a video game called Jimmy Quest. So Quest has been a part of what I do my whole life, apparently. I've just been on one long quest. Anyways, so when I was 10 years old, I wanted to make a video game called Jimmy Quest. And the point of the video game was to find what Jimmy was up to. I had a friend named Jimmy, and it was like an adventure game, and you'd go into this castle and you're like, where's Jimmy? And we're looking for Jimmy and all that. So my first sort of like love was programming, and it wasn't like all, I mean, this was like as simple it could be. I wasn't like programming in C or anything like that. It was like one of these like visual things where you can just sort of like drag things onto the screen, and you can add little code, like if someone clicks on this or taps it, it makes a sound or something. It was really basic coding that I did at age 10. But it was super fun, and that's kind of how I got into coding myself. And it wasn't until I was in my 20s, so 10 years later, that I started doing statistics. So for me, it was code first, statistics later. I know a lot of people that have done it the other way, and I so it just sort of depends on your background and sort of what your skills are and what your interests are. My interests early on were to make a video game.
Yeah, wow, that's amazing. And I think programming really influenced you into this career. And the next question is, what do you see in the future of data science? Like, do we expect new algorithms, faster algorithms? What's your opinion on this?
I mean, I definitely yes to both questions, new and faster. Uh, One thing I think is, as you know, you see this more and more in machine learning is, I mean, it used to be, machine learning was relatively abstract in terms of the implementation. Um, like if you look at the algorithm for doing a tree or building a decision tree or something like that, um, not once does anyone talk about performance, how the algorithm's going to perform. Everyone just sort of talks about like, oh, we're going to calculate Gini scores, and then we'll just separate things based on that, and then we're going to do some more math, blah blah blah. But no one's actually talking about like, no one actually talks about what do you do when you've got so much data that you can't fit it all in memory at the same time. And I think that was so that's sort of early machine learning. But then along came XGBoost, and I'm not certain, but in my experience, XGBoost was the first machine learning algorithm that I came across that actually took performance into account. And it wasn't just like how to build a tree, but it was also like, how do we store this across several servers? How do we process the data efficiently? How do we calculate these splits in a way that can be done very quickly? For me, XGBoost was the first algorithm that I saw that really put emphasis not just on the kind of conceptual aspects of the algorithm, but also on the performance aspects of the algorithm. And we've seen a lot more of that since. I mean, there's other boosting algorithms out there as well are like XGBoost, that are optimized for big data, and people have done similar things for neural networks. But I just think we're going to see more and more of machine learning being less about just pure conceptual things, but also kind of like down and dirty, like you know, how big is are we going to allot this chunk of memory so that we can process it efficiently. We want to use the buffer. We don't want to. If you bring in too little stuff, you're not using the buffer efficiently. If you bring in too much stuff, you're not using the buffer efficiently. Stuff like that, where we're asking those questions. So I do think we're going to see more and more optimizations, but also new algorithms as well. What those will be like, I don't really know off the top of my head. I feel like I'm one of those guys. I'm not on the cutting edge of all this stuff. I'm a couple of steps behind that, trying to learn as quickly as I can and then make that into a video. But I am excited, and I'm very confident that I'll have lots of material for years and years and years to come to make videos for.
Yeah, I'm excited to see some new algorithms too that can maybe influence our life. And so another hacker asked that I see data science has really a lot of potentials in the future. Do you have any tips on how to land a job as a data scientist?
I wish I did. I mean, I will say, uh, and I will say that a lot of people watch my videos and before they do job interviews, and sometimes do well. It sort of depends on the job. So a lot of people have told me that my videos help them either get a new job or get a promotion at work. So it's possible that watching my videos is a good thing to do before a job interview. Sort of depends on the job. Um, but in terms of actual job interview skills, or what skill sets you need, um I mean, the best I can do is well, a lot. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I have more information about this than I'd like to admit. I think one thing that's good to do is do build some projects out yourself. Show that you've got some experience uh, with using, not just, like, you can't just say, "Oh, I watched the StatQuest video on XGBoost." It's probably also a good idea to build out a project without XGBoost and maybe get different data sets to learn the pros and cons of how to make it work and compare it with different algorithms. If you've got a few projects like that where you can say, "Hey, I've actually created some, I've done this." You can show that you've actually got some practical experience. I think that's very helpful in addition to having sort of a conceptual understanding what's going on. So that's something you can do. Like I said earlier, you can always be curious. And if you can find a way to demonstrate your curiosity, you could say, "Hey, I did this project and I was expecting this one thing, but I discovered this other thing, and I dug in deep and I found this other thing." If you can come up with a story about sort of discovering something new, something exciting from the data, uh, I think that I think that would appeal to employers, that they would be like, "Oh, this is someone who's got some curiosity, got a little self motivation going on." I think that those would be attractive. At least to me, they'd be attractive, and I'd be like, "Oh, I'd want to hire you." So that, but those are my recommendations. Um, Although I will say I'm probably not the best person. I'm not a hiring manager, and so I don't know exactly what a hiring manager is going to be interested in and what they're going to test you on. Um, but I can. Those are just my guesses.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your opinion. What's your favorite video on StarQuest? Which video I think you most enjoyed making, I guess.
I'll be honest. The video I'm most proud of, is a series of videos I'm most proud of, are my ones on linear models, because possibly because I spent so much time trying to learn it. And that really was sort of like for me, it was like the breakthrough for statistics of, wait a minute, I can actually understand this. It isn't, I can actually do this. And that was a big thing for me is realizing that it wasn't impossible. And so that's kind of my favorite. I will say though, a lot of my videos, not all of them, but a lot of them have silly songs at the beginning. And I do have a favorite silly song. And my favorite all time silly song is the one that starts off my video on linear discriminant analysis. That song just makes me laugh every time every time I hear it, and I just sing it when I'm like driving around town or I'm in the grocery store. I'll be singing that one under my breath. That's my favorite song. So my favorite topic that I've done, the one that I'm most proud of, is linear models, and my favorite song is the one that precedes linear discriminant analysis.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And we have another question in the chat. What's your advice for students that find it challenging to understand statistics concepts like Bayesian statistics? Like, how should we approach statistics so we are able to appreciate it to its fullest?
I mean, the good news is I'm making videos on Bayesian statistics, so hopefully they'll be out in the next couple of months. So that should help. Hopefully, it'll help me at least, and I think it'll help some other people as well. Um, I mean, my advice. I mean, I would go through my videos on linear models. Linear models are, I mean, they sound super fancy, but they're one of the most fundamental concepts in statistics, traditional statistics. And you can apply Bayesian fanciness to linear models, but I mean, I think it's probably a good idea to learn sort of the basic statistics uh, first. And I know that's a controversial opinion. I know a lot of people are like, no, you should only teach Bayesian because that's the one true statistics, and the old stuff is terrible and blah blah blah. Well, the fact of the matter is, the old stuff is actually done pretty well for about 100 years. I mean, sure, it's not perfect and it can be improved. I'm not arguing that, but I am saying that a lot of good things have come from the traditional statistics, and it's not a bad place to start with those things. And there's a couple of reasons why I think it's not a bad place to start. Um, those standard statistical techniques, linear models, t-tests, ANOVA. By the way, if you're familiar with statistical concepts like a t-test is actually a type of linear model, and ANOVA is a type of linear model. It's a type of regression, believe it or not. And so the one thing I love about linear models, if you learn them and you can learn the concepts behind them, you actually learn most of sort of traditional statistics. And what's cool about those things is they're all implemented in Excel. So you can apply and use these statistics immediately, readily. You can use these skills very easily. They're in Excel, they're in Google Sheets. What is not in Excel and what is not part of Google Sheets are a lot of the Bayesian techniques. And so they are, even though they're great and awesome and maybe improve on the traditional statistics that people have been using for the past 100 years, the Bayesian techniques are a lot harder to use. You can't just like open up a spreadsheet and start doing Bayesian statistics on it. That's not available at this time. So that's why I say if you're going to start somewhere, I'd start with the more traditional statistics because you can do a linear regression straight up. You just plug that in. And and the Bayesian stuff will come. Once you understand the basics and you understand what a distribution is and you understand what a parameter is, well, all Bayesian statistics is is an extra layer on top of that, which is saying, well, okay, now imagine, we've estimated this parameter, but that's just one of many possible estimates that this parameter could have. What if we uh, what if we allow there to be some variation in that estimate itself? And that's sort of the essence of Bayesian statistics, is to say, oh, we're not just going to say the slope of this line is 5, we might do a fit or regression line and we say the slope of this line is 5. We could say, well, the slope of this line is 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 it's likely to be 5, but it could also be 5.3 or it could be 4.8. And what happens when we allow a little bit of wiggle room in what our estimate really means? And that's basically the essence of Bayesian. Um, and so, yeah. So my advice: start with the basics, start with the traditional stuff. You can use that immediately in a spreadsheet, and then start adding on Bayesian later. When you've got more of a grasp of what to do, just because it's harder to actually use, and you can't just use it in a spreadsheet.
Yep, thank you. And hopefully that is a great answer to me. And hopefully that answers your question as well. And another question is, if you were to restart your career in data science with current knowledge, is there anything you wish you to change during your career path?
Huh. uh I wouldn't actually. I actually really like I really like the way it's gone. It's been really fun. And it's just been a dream. It's really been a dream come true. I don't know what I would change. I mean, I'll be honest, if you asked me when I was in college if I was gonna end up doing YouTube videos, I would have said absolutely not. That's not an option. That's not possible. Uh, and so I don't know what I could change to kind of get to where I am right now. Um, yeah. I mean, it's like one of those things in hindsight, you look back and you're like, "Oh, that thing, that taught me this skill that I needed to have, and this other experience taught me this other skill that I needed to have." And and I am basically the sum of those skills. And I'm putting them into practice, and if I change something, maybe I wouldn't have some certain skill and everything would be different. So, I don't think I would change anything about my career.
That's amazing, and I'm really glad you're very positive with your career. And another question is, is it worth it getting a degree in data science when there's many great learning resources online, such as your courses and
Mhm.
videos on StatQuest? So, do you think it's worth it getting a data science degree from like a university?
It depends on the job. It depends on the job that you want. And unfortunately, um, I mean, and if you're a super genius, you could have any job you wanted. It doesn't matter what your education is. You're just a super genius. You can do whatever, and that's fine. I mean, if that's what you are, if you're a super genius, I can't give you any advice. But if you're like me, um, and you're, I mean, in a lot of respects, pretty average, or maybe a little above average or whatever. You know what I'm saying? Like, you're not a super genius. If you're like me and you're not a super genius, um, it depends on the type of job you want and the kind of career path you want to take. Um, one thing I will say is, advancing in a company beyond your initial role can sometimes be dependent on the degree. If it's easy to think early on that I just love data science and I want to do this for the rest of my life. Um, that's it's easy to think that that's possible, but there comes a time in your life where you and I think this is going to sound crazy. You may actually want to move into management, and I'll tell you why that actually isn't so insane. Uh, right now you're learning tons and tons of stuff all the time. Uh, and it seems like you could do that forever, but it actually kind of gets harder to learn new stuff because after say like you've been doing data science and in 10 years, um y- the algorithms that you learned 10 years ago are not going to be as popular anymore. Um the language that in 10 years, who knows if we'll still be coding in Python? Will Python still be a really popular language? Will there be a new language that people are going bonkers about? You'll be coding in Python. You can say, "Oh, I can change," but it's actually like you've invested all this energy into learning all these tricks and techniques. It actually becomes kind of exhausting to be constantly like throwing out the old and learning new stuff. However, regardless of the algorithms, regardless of the programming language, the concepts, how do we evaluate an algorithm? What do we do with data? Those concepts are constant. And so even if languages change and even algorithms change, uh, we're still going to evaluate it with a confusion matrix. We're still going to evaluate it with an ROC graph. That stuff's gonna be the same, and you're gonna and by in 10 years from now, you're gonna have a lot of experience with sort of the pitfalls, and even with new algorithms and new programming languages, the pitfalls of programming are still kind of the same. So you're gonna have some wisdom. And what's nice is to maybe in 10, 15, or 20 years from now, you'll be in a position where um you might want to go into management, because then you can have like a big picture overview of what's going on. You don't have to deal with the nuts and bolts of the nitty-gritty of every day. Because the thing is like, yeah, you're learning all this stuff right now. Well, in 10 years from now, there's going to be someone who's 20 years old that's learning all the hottest stuff right then and there, and their brain is fresh and new and it's exciting. And you're going to be like, oh geez. um and they just going to keep making those 20-year-olds, for the rest of your life. Those 20 years are going to be there learning the state of the art. And you can either try to keep up with them for the rest of your life, or you can move into management and be someone who sees a big picture and knows the pitfalls and can use your wisdom, use your experience, and apply it. So this is all a very, very long way of saying sometimes a degree is helpful for that kind of promotion at work. Not always, but sometimes pedigree is important, to have some certificate, something that's on the wall. It doesn't necessarily mean anything practically, but it's something that, like, those people up in the C-suite, they go, well, like, this guy's got a degree, and it's something they can understand. They're like, well, that sets them apart. That sets you apart from somebody else. Uh, so that, I think, that would be a motive for getting a degree in data science, it gives you some sort of long-term options that you may not have otherwise. And it's almost like I used to think of it as like a union card. It's a way of saying you're part of this club, and people in this club tend to get promotions more. Anyways, I don't know if that helps or not. It's just something to think about in the long term.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your opinion. I know this is an amazing session for both hackers and me, but unfortunately, our time is up. So thank you so much, Dr. Josh Starmer, for your time
Yeah.
and coming to DevHacks Worldwide 3.0 for this amazing session. And we know your time is precious, and we really appreciate it. So this is a really amazing and innovative session for both me and I'm sure for everyone else. So be sure to check out StatQuest on YouTube. They have amazing tutorials in data science, statistics, and machine learning, if that's something you're interested in. And they have step-by-step walkthroughs, and they're really simple to understand for beginners. And thank you to all for coming to this session with Josh Starmer. And if you guys missed a past workshop, feel free to check out our YouTube, and as we will upload them to the channel afterwards. There are other events that are going to be happening as well, so make sure to head over to Discord and learn more about them. Happy hacking, everyone.
Goodbye.